Okay, hello everyone. This is Colin Cox, and this is the Week 9 audio lecture for English 1010 here at Northeast State Community College. So, this week, in many ways, represents the beginning of the final big assignment that you will submit for this course, which is the research essay. But you will submit, and this is primarily what I want to discuss today, you will submit a research essay benchmark assignment in preparation for that research essay. But many of my students, and there's something understandable about this, when I have taught this benchmark assignment along with the research essay in the past, they like to imagine that this is just one big assignment, even though you will submit two completely separate assignments. You will submit the research essay benchmark assignment, and then a few weeks after that, you will submit the actual research essay itself. So for this week, I will primarily work from the research essay benchmark module, which is now available in the content tab. But you can also see the research essay module itself is now available with all of the additional documents that I think are necessary, things you need to know, resources. And of course, over the next couple of weeks, I will highlight and identify these resources and discuss them. But the module itself for the research essay, it is available to you so that you can also read the research essay prompt itself. I'll reference that a bit today. And again, I think there's something intuitive about this. How can you prepare for a research essay? How can you write or complete this benchmark assignment if you do not have a sense of what you will eventually do with a lot of these resources and how you will eventually use these resources? So just know that both modules, they are open and available, and that was not a mistake. So let's go to the research essay benchmark prompt. And before I read it and discuss it, I wanted to say a few things about this assignment and why I think it's important for you to complete it. So first, when you think about how I've graded your work thus far this semester, and also when you think about how I will grade your research essay, I think you could argue I have focused more on the quality of your work. That is to say, if you satisfied all of the minimum requirements, that didn't necessarily mean you would make an A or make a 100. There was a distinct qualitative valence to how I graded and assessed your work. Quality mattered. With the benchmark assignment, the quality still matters, but my approach, how I will grade it, it will feel more quantitative. And what I mean by this is quite simply, if you complete the steps that I describe, if you complete these three benchmarks as I ask you to, you will earn full credit or something quite close to full credit. Most of my students, they like this benchmark assignment because it's just asking them to complete a series of steps. And again, while quality always matters, the way I will grade and assess this assignment, it is far less qualitative and it is far more quantitative. But there's a few additional reasons why I like to incorporate or include this assignment. One of them, quite simply, is because it prevents you, not that any of you would be inclined to do this, of course, but it really prevents my students from waiting and procrastinating. I think these three things that I ask you to do are important and necessary steps to any successful research essay. Therefore, you could easily replicate something like this for future research essays in different classes. Not that you would need to submit this or submit these benchmarks for those classes, but again, I think these are three essential steps to successfully complete any research essay. But another reason why I like this assignment and why I like to include and incorporate this assignment is because, as I suggested a moment ago, I think this formalizes the research essay process in an important way. Something you'll hear me say repeatedly throughout this benchmark unit, but also the research essay unit, is writing research essays is incredibly difficult. It is often a process that requires from not just students, but also professional writers, a lot of energy and perseverance. The research essay, just as an assignment, as a writing assignment, is fraught with so much failure. And I'm not saying all of this to frighten or intimidate you, but I think anything you can do to formalize that process will create certain mitigating effects so that the possibility or the chance of failure is far less. If it doesn't feel like you're just throwing things together and hope that a coherent research essay emerges out of that process, whatever you can do to avoid that, I think is a good thing. And one of the best things you can do to avoid that is, again, formalize the process. So that is one of the more important and significant reasons why I like this benchmark assignment. It formalizes this process in an important way. So, as I said just a moment ago, this is a benchmark assignment, but within this assignment, there are three smaller tasks or benchmarks that you must complete. And those three are the research topic coupled with a research question, a working works cited page with annotations, and a research essay abstract. And so let's start with just the first one because I think it's the easiest. Obviously, selecting a topic and then selecting a question. So you need to know what it is you want to research and write about. That is the topic. And you then, and I think this is possibly the harder or more challenging aspect of this benchmark, what is the question that's guiding your research? So allow the research process itself to potentially reveal that question to you. But one of the reasons why I like this kind of question, and I would argue any writing assignment should have a question like this, and you can see this from the example that I provide. If and when you have an answer to that question, not that you should have an answer to it at the beginning of this process, that answer may function as a kind of thesis statement. So look at the example on the prompt itself, the topic, and you can use the examples that I provide on the benchmark prompt as a guide for how this should appear on your own benchmark assignment. You can just replicate my examples on your assignment. The example topic, electric vehicles. The research question, will electric vehicles meaningfully address climate change? Now, without necessarily doing any research, maybe some of you have never thought about this, you've never conducted research or done research on electric vehicles. Just think about the possible ways you could answer that question. Yes, they will. No, they won't. Either one of those, while you would want to, of course, add perhaps more detail, you would want your answer to be a bit more nuanced, those basically operate as thesis statements. Yes, electric vehicles will meaningfully address climate change. No, electric vehicles will not meaningfully address climate change. You could argue both of those points to varying degrees of success. This is, again, one of the reasons why I think having a question like this is so important. Once you feel, once you think, once you are confident that you have an answer to your question, you also have your thesis statement. So I'm putting you in this position where you will hopefully develop a thesis statement just from one of these benchmarks itself. Now, if we look at benchmark 2, you can see that compared to benchmark 1, benchmark 2 asks a little more from you, but again, you can use my examples as a kind of guide for what your benchmark 2 can and should look like. I want you to complete a working works cited page with annotations for each source, which is also a way of saying an annotated bibliography. Now, here I would encourage you to, at some point, take a look, read the research essay prompt, because you'll see that the minimum source count for this essay is 5, which is quite modest. For the working works cited page, you must have at minimum 5 sources. A question students often ask, if I submit my minimum 5 sources on my benchmark assignment, but in the few weeks after the benchmark assignment, as I am writing my research essay, if I realize, and this is something that may happen, it often happens with almost anyone who writes a research essay, you realize you need to conduct additional research. Is that something I can do? Is that permissible? And of course, absolutely it is. I just want to see, one of the goals for this benchmark is, again, to put you in a position where you've actually started doing research for this assignment. If you need to add additional resources, if you need to add additional sources to your works cited page, that is completely acceptable. And again, frankly, it's something that I expect. If you have the same 5 sources on your final works cited page as you have on your working works cited page, while that's not impossible, I would like to see you possibly conducting additional research because you might find that that is necessary. But working works cited page, 5 sources minimum, but you also need to have these annotations. An annotation, and you'll see that I offer a description here, but I provided additional resources, links in the research essay benchmark module. Think of an annotation as a brief description, summary, and evaluation of a source. It's a great way for you to show your reader that you have actually read the source that you intend to cite. In addition, and most annotations are quite short, it also, and this might seem silly, but it also depends on the length of the source. An annotation for a 20-page peer-reviewed essay might be a bit longer than an annotation for a similar sort of essay, but one that's only half that length. So if you have a longer piece that you know you intend to cite, don't be surprised if your annotation is a bit longer. Additionally, and you can see this from the example that I provide, I think annotations are great spaces to begin thinking about, and again, formalizing this process. I think it's a great place to begin thinking about how you intend to use your sources. And again, that might change as your understanding of your topic and your argument evolves, but don't hesitate to use that annotation space as an opportunity to communicate to your reader how you think you might use a potential source, because that's something you should think about as you're reading and researching, because you're not just doing research to do research. This is all geared toward writing a research essay. So again, take this opportunity to formalize that process. Think about, write about, even if it's just a couple of sentences, how you may use a potential source, because I think you might find that's quite useful. And again, these annotations, in addition to giving me a sense that you have in fact read the information that you intend to cite, this is something you can return to later, especially if you need to remind yourself what a source is about. These sorts of summaries can be endlessly useful for that reason. So for this particular benchmark, to successfully complete it, at minimum 5 sources, annotations for each source. Finally, the research essay abstract. So an abstract, and again, I provided additional resources in this module. You can think of an abstract as a short 200 to 300 word proposal for your research essay. Imagine that you want to give something like an elevator pitch for the essay that you hope to write. In many ways, that's the goal of the abstract. You should, in addition, incorporate what you think are key terms and phrases, any references to academic disciplines that you know your essay would comfortably sit or sort into, and even your prospective argument, which is to say what you think your thesis might be, because you might already have a sense of that as you are completing this benchmark assignment. And I'll say one thing about writing an abstract before writing the essay itself, because again, you might read this and think, well, this seems strange. How can I summarize an essay that I haven't written? And the reason why I want you to do this is because this is how a lot of academic literature exists. This is how a lot of academics produce their work. They don't write an essay and then write an abstract for it. They often write the abstract first as a proposal. Once, for example, an academic journal accepts the proposal, then they do the work of writing the essay itself. But It's a fantastic exercise as well because it's putting you in a position to think about what you hope to do, want to do. What are your aspirations for this essay? In that way, you can almost imagine an abstract as something akin to a mission statement for a fledgling business or company. This is what we want our business to be, this is what we aspire to do. Think of the abstract as something quite similar. It is a space for you to articulate and describe what you want to do, what you aspire to do. With that said, if there are slight changes, shifts, and evolutions to the final product, which is to say your research essay, that's completely acceptable for things to shift a little bit. But if you read a little farther down, you'll see, and I'm skipping over the evaluation language because I want to talk about this first. Your research essay benchmark is how you will prepare for the research essay. Many students like to think of the research essay benchmark and the research essay as one large assignment, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, the topic you select for the research essay benchmark is the topic you will write about for the research essay, and that's the important language. Once you submit your research essay benchmark, you cannot change your essay topic. While your research essay might shift and change slightly from what you suggest it will be with your abstract, you cannot, for example, submit a research essay benchmark assignment about one topic and then write a research essay about a totally different topic. Again, imagine that the benchmark assignment and the research essay, they have a kind of relationship to one another. You are completing the benchmark assignment in preparation for the essay that you will eventually write. Now, quickly, something about my evaluation approach or how I will grade and evaluate your work. I spoke about this earlier, but I'll go ahead and reiterate it here. Each benchmark represents 25% of your overall grade, and there's an additional 25% for participation and work ethic. This is something that I have for my traditional non-online courses, but what I decided to do for everyone here, because this is an online class, if you submit your work on time and you complete every benchmark correctly, you will earn full credit or 25% for this work ethic portion of the benchmark grade. So again, what this basically means is that if you complete each of these benchmarks as I described them, if nothing is missing, if it satisfies the minimum requirements, you will earn full credit for all of these benchmarks, which will result in a 100 grade. So again, a more quantitative approach to how I will grade this benchmark and less of a qualitative approach, even though there's always a qualitative element to, frankly, anything you may or may not submit in an academic environment or setting. So a few final things that I wanted to say, and I've gestured towards a lot of this already in this audio. Here, if you look at the research essay prompt, you'll see I already mentioned the 5 sources minimum. And please feel free to exceed that 5 source minimum because that is quite modest. But the minimum word count is 2,000 words. And I know often students hear that and they think that is quite a dramatic increase from everything I've asked them to write thus far. And it is certainly an increase. But keep in mind, unlike anything else that I've asked you to submit this semester, you will actively incorporate borrowed material into this assignment. That borrowed material, those quotes, summaries, paraphrases from your works cited page, those all count toward your overall word count. So keep that in mind. It's not just you writing 2,000 words about a topic, it's you writing and engaging with sources, but you'll also have those sources and that language from those sources to incorporate into this essay, and that will help to satisfy the 2,000 word minimum word count. But the other thing to remember, and this is where it becomes quite important for you to diligently track your word count, the 2,000 word minimum, you must exclude the works cited page. Now, when you submit all of this, and this is the research essay, not the benchmark assignment, and I'll mention this in subsequent audio lectures, when you submit everything, your research essay, your works cited page, you'll submit it as one giant document. You need to ensure that the essay itself is 2,000 words. It cannot be 2,000 words with the works cited page, because at that point, because your works cited page will probably be a few hundred words, that means your research essay would probably be far fewer than those 2,000 words. So, again, just please keep that in mind and again, I'll remind you of this, but keep that in mind as you are counting, tracking, tabulating your overall word count. Okay, final thing, and again, this is from the research essay prompt, but I've already gestured towards this. The research essay that you will write in this course, for this course, must have a thesis statement. What that means is that it is an argumentative research essay, not an informative research essay. And here, the difference, quite simply, you can imagine an informative research essay might feel and read something like a Wikipedia page entry. Wikipedia page entries, for example, provide a lot of more often than not, a lot of interesting and thought provoking information, but it is hard to imagine that they are making or mounting an argument about a particular topic. Your essay, by contrast, must do that. You must have a thesis. You are staking a claim. You're not simply providing information about a topic. Now, there will be perhaps some informative moments or informative aspects of your essay, but there needs to be that overarching argumentative assertion, which is to say your thesis statement. Another great way to think about this is all research essays are to some degree informative research essays, but not all research essays are argumentative research essays. So again, just please keep that in mind. Okay, I think that's where I want to stop for now. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me, but start thinking about possible research essay topics. And if I didn't say so, I'll provide information in the announcements feed at some point this week about the college's online databases, because one of the conversations that I'll want to have over the next couple of weeks is assessing the credibility of sources. And a great place to start, whether it's with selecting a topic or once you've selected a topic, actually finding information, are these library databases. And again, I'll speak about this in later lectures because there's a whole conversation about like degrees of credibility that I do not want to discuss now, because at this point you should just be thinking about possible topics. Okay, for English 1010 here at Northeast State Community College, my name is Colin Cox. It was lovely talking to all of you. Have a great week and email me if you have any questions.